Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for your recognition. The resolution brought to us today is I've got new rules, I'll count them. And the case topic that we derive from this is that local police should be required to live in the area that they patrol in. Now, we came to the case topic from the resolution because we thought of rules, regulations, laws, and ultimately who enforces laws, and those are police officers. So for our definitions, local police is the civil force responsible for the prevention of crime of the town which they are in. Should be required is mandatory, and the area they patrol in is the town they are responsible for patrolling on their day-to-day basis for their job. So our first contention is perspective, that these police officers would gain more perspective if they were actually living in the town that they were working in. And this would be the case because when you are in a town and you're living there and you're not just working there, you're living alongside all of the other towns members, you're getting to know what it's like to actually live in that town, not just work there, not just go to a building and work there for 7 hours, but actually spend your time there, your afternoons, go to the local shops, interact with the individuals, your neighbors. And you're no longer just there for one specific job, but you're there for where your home is, where your family is. And this would help the police officers understand how life is in that town for the people that are living there. And with more perspective, then this can make the police officers perhaps more committed to the community they are in, feel more empathetic, understand more the complexities of living in that town, or what's good about it, what's not. And when you're just working there, you're only getting one side. But when you're living there, you're really having access to what it's like as a whole. And with this, you can get really more feelings from the point of view of the inhabitants, and not just looking on the outside, but actually being part of it and being ingrained with the community. And these individuals could be more committed to the community, and they would probably look more despairingly on the less well-off. So our second contention is familiarity, that if these police officers, if they lived in the town, they'd be more familiar with their surroundings, and perhaps it'd be easier to identify and build trust with neighbors and also even potential criminals if they know who might be involved in certain crimes, or what kind of person might be part of something that might be involved in some sort of incident, or they would know more of what's going on in the town by actually living there and having those connections with community members and with other people that are living there, and not just getting the information on the side of a police officer, but also getting info as a community member and having that relationship with others. And they would know the town better, and they would have an increased response rate if they're more familiarized with the area they're in, because multiple police officers in large cities also, if they're living there, then they would be there all the time, and they would really have the most complete access to where everything is, as well as just knowing where potential areas of high crime are, or just having more and more familiarity with the area they're in. That would just increase and would help in response rate, and also just being more aware of their surroundings. Our third contention is that it would build trust with the more connections that they have with community members. They would probably be more willing to go the extra mile and prevent and solve crimes with this trust that they have with individuals. A big issue in the United States is that Americans don't feel like they can really trust or rely on police officers in their town or in their community. And when you see these police officers outside of their work without their uniform, but in their normal clothes, as your neighbor, as your friend, then this can build a lot of trust with the normal individuals as well as this police force, which is very important and crucial, so the community members can rely on the police officers and use them as a resource, and not feel some sort of negativity or feel that they will be looked at inferior as inferior, but that they will have this connection, because if you have a connection with someone that's just outside of your work interaction, but you know them as a person and who they are and as a friend, then you would feel more willing, or you'd feel more comfortable going to them and asking them for help, and the police officer would also know the community members and also feel more comfortable with them. So there's this better possibility of improving their trust, and constituents could help prevent crimes. And with this relationship, when you're closer together and you have a connection that's not just that you call a police officer once or twice, but you know them as a person, then this could really help the constituents feel safer, and also make the police officer act more in an empathetic way, or know more of who they are exactly helping. So to reiterate my points, the first contention was that officers would gain further perspective of what it's like to live in this town or this city, in this community, and with perspective, their morals could definitely change, because they could feel empathetic or really understand the perspective and the side that these individuals are experiencing and what it's like from their point of view, than just looking on the outside and really seeing from that side, which could increase trust and have a much better and positive relationship in the town. Familiarity is the second contention, and that would be that police officers would find it easier to understand the town, the individuals living there, and have overall a more positive relationship with those there. And the third contention is that it would build more trust and more connections, as when you're not just having a relationship with someone that you might just call or see once or twice, but when you're actually living amongst them, and these individuals are going to town committee meetings, school committee meetings, are taking part in organizations of the town, they're actually being part of it, and they're taking an initiative that might have never been available to them if they weren't actually living in that town, and taking part in those issues and programs or whatever is going on in the town, and that would build more trust between community members and officers. So thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, and I strongly urge you to vote for the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I now call this House to order and call upon the Leader of the Opposition to present his constructive speech not to exceed 8 minutes with a 30-second grace period. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and also thank you for taking this time out of your Saturday to come and debate this topic with us. Thank you to the government for creating a very interesting case topic, even though it was on very short notice. Again, I will go through the case topic and the contentions brought up by the Prime Minister, and then I will delve into my partner and I's argument. So the contention is local police force should be required to live in the area that they patrol. So the first contention was that it would give more perspective for the police officers. Contention 2, it will build familiarity with the area. And contention 3, trust between the police officer and the community. And my partner and I have thought about this, and it seems more that this system of forcing local officers to live within the towns is actually going to make justice more questionable, and thus making America a less safer place. And I'll dive in. So, more perspective. This, however, and we formally accept the link in definitions. Sorry about that. Sorry. So the whole case topic is about local police officers in towns. First contention is gaining more perspective. The thing is, though, police officers in towns and police officers in cities are two different things. Police officers in towns have a center, an HQ, that is already located very close to the town in order to be very responsive to any crimes in the neighborhood, in order to be quick. In the cities, however, this would actually be a better argument to have officers live in their community. For example, in inner cities, there are 2 different shifts, the day shift and the night shift. So officers during the day shift in an inner city see a completely new area than the officers in the night shift. This system would work much better in cities than it was in towns. Towns are generally a very small niche in America, and which police officers are already greatly involved in. So in this case, gaining more perspective doesn't really work here. Contention 2, familiarity. First, this is very close to the first contention, I believe, and a big point that I will from here on drive through is creating a system of bias. So first off, being familiar with your town and where potential crime is police work 101. You don't need to live in the town or close by. You should be able to report to your HQ and thus go from there and know where potential crimes are happening. Furthermore, going into the system of bias. If a police officer is living within the town, he or she is losing their objectivity, the exact thing that law and justice is based on. So, what I'm trying to drive home is that if an officer does live within the town, then they are getting too sucked in into the town politics and the minutia of what's in front of them, instead of looking at a crime case objectively. So take Timmy. He gets involved into the town because he's been living there for a while, and then he starts picking favorites. And because of that, law is then lost. Granted, it may not be very severe, but even still, objectivity and justice is no longer being upheld. Contention 3, trust. Justice, the thing that the police are meant to hold up, is not based on truth, it's not based on trust, but it is based on truth. By living in a town, you become succumbed and conditioned to the area around you. You live within your own environment, and you are unable to really look at something objectively, the goal of a police officer. A point here that my partner and I are trying to put home is that we want an America that has police officers that value truth over trust, justice over bias, and a better tomorrow over familiarity. Those are the 3 key points. Furthermore, in a sense, we are also taking away an officer's ability to choose where he or she wants to live. Granted, the government is creating a case topic in which they will help promote the greater good. A greater good, however, is not going to come of this based on the fact that objectivity is being lost. However, by also forcing an officer to surrender his or her right to choose where he or she wants to live is just disrespectful. Joining the local police office enforcement or any police department, you sacrifice many other opportunities and you go into danger a lot. So why not give them the opportunity to live where they want to live? And that is just another sub-point to our argument. And with that, I rest my case, and I strongly urge that you vote for the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of the I now call this House to order and call upon the member of the government to present her constructive speech not to exceed 8 minutes with a 30-second grace period. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your recognition. The resolution brought forth today is I've got new rules, I'll count them. And the case topic that my partner and I have derived from this is that the local police force should be required to live in the area that they patrol. To jump into the first contention, it was about perspective, meaning of what it's like to live in that area. And because if this town or city becomes your home, you're familiar with that area. As my partner brought up, whether you go grocery shopping or have children that attend the school system, you are familiar with it or you have this perspective. The opposition questioned or said that this makes justice more questionable, talking about there are day and night shifts. However, having day and night shifts, but the police are required to live in this area, they are familiar with the city or town in the day and at night, meaning that this would actually add to the perspective. And rather than just looking at it from the perspective of being the police, they can now have this perspective of actually being a citizen, as being part of the actual community, rather than just being on the force and just patrolling the area, and they have that perspective. The second contention was a familiarity of the general area, knowing where everything is. This could actually have an increased response rate, because if the police live in the area and they know where everything is, then that means when there's a call and they say to go to a certain store or to a certain home on a street, they know exactly where that is and they know how to get there, and they can get there much faster, and it has a more efficient system with that. The opposition again brought up that this system of bias, but bias has two sides. If anything now, the police can't necessarily make assumptions about the town or the city as a whole, rather than having one maybe negative light on the town because they don't necessarily live there, they just patrol it and there's more crime or something, then living there means that the police won't have bias, have a negative bias, because they actually live there. And the opposition brought up a story about Tim. But if you join the police force and you're part of that and you take the oath and you know the laws, then my partner and I would hope that the police would stay true to that, and they know the laws and they wouldn't objectify or put their personal opinions and beliefs in front of what their career is as the police. So my partner and I argue that with a system of bias, then there are again two sides of it. And the police, while they're living there, they're not putting their personal beliefs in front of what their career is. The third contention was that this builds trust between the community and the police. As my partner brought up, there are currently heightened tensions in today's age. There's cases of, you see, police brutality, overstep of their power, and there's just this general distrust between that community and the police. So if the police were living in this area and they were part of the community, this would help decrease some of that tension because they are now part of it. What happens in the community is now affecting the police, and the police's actions then affect the community. So there's that mutual relationship between them, which would then build trust and build up that confidence. While the opposition mentioned how truth and trust are two separate things, and overall truth is more important, at the same time, truth can be derived from the trust. Because if the community is not trusting the police, then how can we expect to get that truth revealed? Because the interactions and that relationship of having the community be truthful with the police might not be there because that trust wasn't there at the beginning. So if we want to get the truth from the community and we want the police to as well be truthful in their patrolling of the area, there needs to be that balance and that connection between the area and the citizens of the area and the police force, because they're now working together with the implementation of my partner and I's case topic. So going back to the first contention of the perspective, my partner and I are arguing that they will gain a much broader perspective of the whole. They're not looking at it from just one side. So although the opposition questions that this would make justice more questionable, in actuality, it would make it better. It would improve the justice system in the community, considering the fact that the police are now gaining both perspectives, because the bias is not just on the side in which the police are putting, they know the people personally, and they might be saying that because I know this person, they would never do something like that. That's not what my partner and I are arguing, rather than having, again, that trust and that perspective and the familiarity. So with the second contention being familiarity and how they are familiar with the areas and the increased response rate, and with the story about Tim and how we are hoping that the police force are not putting their personal beliefs in front of their career. And then the third contention of building up the trust between the community and the police, because again, truth is derived from trust, and without the two, there cannot be a balance. Therefore, there wouldn't be the truth without the trust. So with that, I'd like to close, and I strongly urge you to vote for the government.
Thank you, member of the government. I now call this House to order and call upon the member of the opposition to present his constructive speech, not to exceed 8 minutes, with a 30-second grace period. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would definitely like to echo my partner's words in saying that we're really happy to have you here and have you judging our round. I can't say the weather's been treating us really well, but I'm just happy that there's a lot of other things you could have been doing. So we're really glad to have you here. So on to this case, I'm really glad that the government has brought a great case topic, and I'm sure this will make for an interesting debate. So their first contention, just to summarize, was perspective. And the government stated that more perspective in the town is better to know what it's like to live there and understand the point of view of the citizens. And to this I respond, perspective is an interesting thing, especially in the case of law. We've been really trying to stress the concept of bias because in all forms of bias, be it subconscious or conscious bias, it exists. And you're trying to eliminate it as much as possible in the law enforcement situation. Because when in our country, we value truth over trust in that we want to make sure that the facts are clear. And that's really what we're trying to stress here, in that you don't want any other external factors to influence a case. If a police officer is in charge of handling a case with someone that he already knows or happens to know, then there's already subconscious bias involved there, and we don't want that. We want to look at the facts, we want to look at the evidence, dissect the evidence, and make a just call that is best for the community and that serves, serves the whole concept of the law system in America, in that we want everybody to be who has done something wrong to be prosecuted for what they've done. That we want them to take responsibility for their actions, and we want the people to be that were affected to be given justice. And that whole concept is based on facts, and that's what we're trying to stress here. We don't want these other factors, such as if you live in a town or community, there will be bias involved, because even if it's subconscious, if your friend Jimmy is accused of a crime and you're the officer in charge of that case, there's going to be subconscious bias, because maybe you tell yourself, I don't know, Jimmy's a good person, we played poker the other night. And that's an external factor that we don't want in this case. So, just to say again, we really don't want external factors to influence the facts of a case, and we want to make sure we eliminate as much bias as possible. And that would just be introduced more into the community with the implementation of this case topic. Going on to the second the second contention, it was familiarity. Sorry about that. And in which the government stated that it's easier to identify and build trust with neighbors, and there could potentially be an increased response rate. To this, I would just like to clarify that police don't necessarily work from home. They report to the station for the town that they're assigned, and usually they spend their day there. Just like if somebody's working at an office, they go to the office, spend their day there, and come back. The police go to the police station, whatever assignments they're given from the police station in that town, they go around and handle it and come back. It's not like they have to, every time they have to do a round or something, they drive from their home and come back and then go back and come back. And I'm going to allude to this later, but if they happen to be driving, we don't want to restrict where they want to live, and I'll get to that really soon. And also I want to bring up like town sheriffs. Town sheriffs, their whole job, like the whole description of the job, is to get involved with the community and have a good understanding of what the point of view of the community is. That's their job. So if we already have somebody for that, why should we have everybody else, everybody in the police force of that town, which is presumably a relatively large number, why do we constrict them and force them to live in a certain area if somebody's already handling this responsibility? And so I just wanted to bring up that point. And once again, if they're not introduced to the community, if they're looking at the perspective of a case through one lens, the external lens, so that they can only see the facts which are important to the case, that's much more important, and that's much more just for both the people in the community and the sheriff as well, or the officer as well. The third contention was trust. The government stated that people are more willing, or the police officers are more willing to solve crimes with trust, and that people won't fear them, so to say. They'll be more trusting of them, and hopefully they'll recognize the police as good people. And I just want to say, like, in general, police obviously, there are going to be exceptions to everything, but the police are signing up to uphold the law of our nation, and that's a large responsibility, and that speaks volume to their character. I don't think they should need to prove to the citizens that what they're trying to do is for their betterment, because that's why they signed up for their job. And the leader, the member of government said that this decreases tension and builds trust and confidence. But are you really sure about that? I mean, how can we expect people to act as their true selves if a police officer is living next door? You really can't. I mean, this whole system, if this was implemented, would be based on like prejudice, because if a police officer happens to know that something fishy is going on nearby, then they're going to look into that house. But in reality, the same fishy thing might be going on a block away, but they're not introduced to that because that's not their neighborhood. And to that, I would like to bring up, if you are living in a community, I'm sure that I don't know probably even a tenth of the people in my town. My town is relatively large. It's about like 30,000 people. Even if I happened to be a police officer and I lived in a certain neighborhood, a certain part of the town, I'm not going to know 30,000 people off the bat. You're only getting introduced to a small volume of people, and that doesn't really affect your overall job, because once again, as my partner stated, the number one job of a police officer is to know the area that they're responsible for. But just living in a town and knowing some of the people, maybe like a tenth of the population, and that might even be a stretch, isn't really going to help you with that. And that the benefits certainly don't outweigh the cons, because as I'm going to bring up right now, as we stated in our counter contention, the police are already giving up so much. The police are giving up, their ability. Anytime they get a call, be it in the middle of the night, they have to report somewhere. And and the opposition stated, the government stated, and I thought this was quite outlandish. They said that the police know the law and personal beliefs shouldn't be put ahead of career. That was a direct quote, and I'm 100% sure I'm not misquoting that. This is kind of outlandish, because what's more important, the personal life or your job? I understand that the job of these police officers is to uphold the law, and that's certainly important, but police officers obviously have a life of their own, and things such as family, you don't want them to miss significant life events, you want them to enjoy their life. The police aren't just slaves that work for us and try to uphold our law. The police are people too, and they're American citizens. They have the right to choose where they live. And by restricting this, my partner brought up the example of Tim. If Tim finds a really nice house in the next town over that's about a 5-minute or 10-minute drive from his station, and it's a beautiful house and it's affordable for him, suddenly he's not able to get that house because of this law, and that's really impeding on his rights as an American citizen. So just to quickly summarize, the first point that the government brought up is perspective. And again, perspective is an interesting thing, but you don't want the external factor. You don't want additional factors to influence a case, in that you don't want subconscious bias or anything like that to get in the way of what truly holds up our American justice system, which is the facts, and giving justice to the people that need it. Second point, familiarity. It's easier to identify and build trust with neighbors. But my partner and I argue that the police know where they're going, especially if they're responding to a call. Rarely do they show up at the wrong address. And also, town sheriffs, that's their job. That's why they're there, to get involved with the community. We don't need to drag every police officer into that. And once again, we only want them to be introduced to the facts. And finally, the last thing they said was trust. They're more willing to solve crimes with trust, and people won't fear them and recognize them as good people. Again, police are signing up to uphold the law. I think that speaks volumes to their character. And really, how can we expect people to act as their true selves if their neighbors next door are police officers? And finally, our counter contention, what's more important, the personal life or your job? Even though the job is extremely important, these police officers are people as well, and we shouldn't impede on their rights as an American citizen to live where they want to live, because that's just kind of outlandish, and that's being very disrespectful and unjust to them. So thank you so much. Again, thank you for being here, and I strongly urge you to vote for the opposition.
Thank you, member of the opposition. I now call this House to order and call upon the leader of the opposition to present his rebuttal speech, not to exceed 4 minutes, 30-second grace period. You are now recognized. Leader, you're now recognized.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for taking this time out of your Saturday. I'm going to keep this relatively short. A better tomorrow over familiarity, justice over trust, and truth over prejudice. I mentioned this in my first speech, and I'm going to continue to build on these principles because I truly believe that these are the foundations of creating a strong civil society. I trust the police department. Granted, they make mistakes. They're not always perfect. But I trust in them because of their objectivity. They look at the world through a critical lens, a lens that is only swayed by common sense, logic, and truth. That is justice. As a society, we rely on the police to protect us. They cannot do that if they are swayed by our own minutia, our own social politics. If we bring the police into our own world, our own town, and condition them to think a certain way, to look at a certain family a certain way, to play favorites, we are losing justice. By living in a community, you're giving an officer an isolated perspective. Truth is based on facts, not a friendly relationship. Justice is achieved through a system removed of prejudice and bias. And the local police, and a better tomorrow won't come if local police live in the area. A point that I would also like to drive home that has been mentioned several times throughout this debate is Tim. Tim finds a house in one neighborhood, a town that he does not report to, a town that has a better school system, a town that has a better life for his kid, Kevin. But because he reports in the neighboring town that doesn't have a better school system, he is forced to live there. Kevin then goes to a different school system, is unable to go to the college that his father intended him to go to, and then lives a life that is less fulfilling. We do not want to remove this. By passing this, by going through with this, we impede on an individual's, not any individual, but an American individual, to live where they want to live. This is not only unethical, but ridiculous. And with that, I rest my case. And I strongly you to urge for the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. I now call this House to order and call upon the Prime Minister to present her rebuttal speech, not to exceed 5 minutes with a 30-second grace period. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for your recognition. In our country today, the relationship between police officers and American citizens is not the best relationship that it has been. Many individuals see police officers in a negative light, and police brutality has grown, and the tensions have increased, and this has not helped the relationship between these two sides. One of the biggest issues of police brutality and these differences is not understanding the other side or their perspective or their life in that community. When you want to help a community or when you want to go experience what other people are living, you go there and you see their side, you see what their life is like, how they live. For example, if you go to a missionary trip, you don't just stay in a hotel in that country, you go and you live with those people. If you're part of the Peace Corps, you don't just stay in a different city, but you go and you live with that community. You attend the schools there, you eat their food, you live in those homes. You understand because you're there, because you're seeing their side, their life, and you're not just looking out from the outside. When you look from the outside, you can get a very different response, a very different answer than when you're there, in the moment, at that time, when you're going to the school committee meetings, when you're going to the town meetings, when you're going to the same shops that everyone else goes to, when you're meeting the same people, when you're voting for the same town officials, when you're there and when you're understanding what people are believing in, how their life is like, that's when you get the results of understanding what life is like in that town and in that city. And this is how you can get more trust with the individuals that are there. And it was brought up many times that truth is more important than trust. But trust comes from truth. When you have a truthful relationship with someone, when they're telling you the truth, when they're not lying, when they're not being skeptical, that's when you gain trust. When you have a relationship with someone that you can really understand them and know their side, then you can get trust from that. Truth can be derived from trust. Now, you lose justice when there are wrongful convictions, when there's police brutality, when there's events that really do not that are not truthful. That's when you lose justice. But when you're in that moment and when you're living with individuals there, then that is when you have better relationships with people and you really start to understand their perspective and their side. Now, prejudice stems from the outside. Everyone has preconceived ideas, and you come into something thinking another way. But the way you can lose these ideals, the way that you can improve on them and actually know the truth of the matter is when you go somewhere and you experience the situation, where you expose yourself to the lifestyle there. That's how you can lose your prejudice. You always will have prejudice. It stems from the outside, not the inside. So when these police officers are coming in, sure, they will have prejudice. Sure, they might think that they'll have bias. And but when you're in that situation, when you're in the inside and you're living there, then that's the way that we can start to erase this. And bias, it is important to trust the police officers and the oath that they take, the job that they're following. They are following the law and they're taking an oath, and we hope that they're not putting their personal beliefs in any situation, but they're sticking by to what they stand for. They represent the United States, and we strongly applaud them for that. So we know that while bias can definitely arise, at the end of the day, they're working as a police officer and their job is to serve justice. So while situations can arise where there could be some sort of problems in bias, at the end of the day, their job is to be truthful and to take the oath and follow that. Now, it is important to improve these relationships between police officers and citizens because, as we know, there are many problems in the United States today. And there are ways that we can fix these problems by exposing them to the situations that these individuals live in and ensuring that they're building relationships with others and having a truthful relationship, as truth can stem from truth can be derived from trust, and it is important to change ideals by exposing those to the different lives and ensuring that they are not just getting one side and looking from the outside, but being there in the moment and really seeing the truth of the matter. Thank you very much, and I strongly urge you to vote for the government.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, everybody.